Good afternoon. Thank you for joining NTD TV today. You're watching the second half of NTD TV's live coverage of the July 20th Falun Gong Rally for Freedom in Washington, D.C. If you missed the first half, you can watch a replay on Facebook and on NTD.TV following the conclusion of our coverage today. In the first hour, we brought you live press conferences and speeches given by various members of Congress, as well as human rights organization leaders. It took place at the West Lawn of Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., commemorating today, July 20th. And the date is very important because July 20th marks the time, and this is Zenon Dolnicki, my guest. Thank you for joining me, Zenon.
I'm happy to.
Now, July 20th is a date that millions of people were affected by and that they will remember forever. In China, on July 20th in 1999, the persecution of Falun Gong began. After 7 years of people practicing this meditation openly and freely. Now, let's show you a video about this particular date.
In 1998, the Chinese government estimated that between 70 and 100 million people in China were practicing Falun Gong. It was the most popular practice of its kind in Chinese history, but the leader of the Chinese Communist Party wanted it gone. In the early hours of July 20, 1999, public security bureaus carried out an organized operation to arrest the volunteer coordinators of Falun Gong practice sites throughout China. This was ordered by then-Chinese leader Jiang Zemin. He declared that Falun Gong should be eliminated within 3 months. When his campaign failed to stop Falun Gong, he simply cracked down harder. Jiang Zemin implemented a strategy to eradicate Falun Gong practitioners by ruining their reputations, crushing them financially, and eliminating them physically. He also declared that beating them to death counts as suicide. From 1999 to present, the Falun Gong website minghui.org has verified at least 4,000 cases of Falun Gong practitioners being persecuted to death, but some estimates suggest the true number of practitioners killed is actually several hundred thousand. In response to 18 years of brutal repression, Falun Gong practitioners inside and outside China have been unyielding in their efforts to expose the persecution through peaceful activities.
And if you're just tuning in and you don't know what Falun Gong is or why people have gathered at Washington, D.C. at this time during this year, well, we're going to tell you. First of all, Falun Gong is a type of Qigong like you guys have just watched. You've heard of Tai Chi before, which is also another type of Qigong. There's actually hundreds of types of different Qigongs. And Zenon, tell me, you have a background in, you have been a personal trainer, so you've practiced Eastern and Western health practices. Why was Falun Gong especially popular after it was introduced in 1999 to the Chinese public?
Well, one reason was the ease of learning it. You can just go down to the park and learn it. But it was also the healing efficacy, the power of the actual practice. It's deeply rooted in Chinese science, which has made its way to the West through acupuncture and herbology. But all of the foundations of that science come from this practice of Qigong. And all the masters were Qigong masters.
So people in China, though, like my grandfather, practiced Qigong. So are you saying that Qigong wasn't as effective in healing before Falun Gong? Or?
Well, no. It definitely had a certain degree of healing efficacy, just the way acupuncture and herbology does. But Falun Gong is an ancient practice that was passed in secret for thousands of years. And Master Li Hongzhi brought it to the public in 1992 to benefit the welfare of mankind. And it's a very high-level practice. It starts you at a very high level. And the potency of the practice is experienced by many people with many different ailments. And after having that change in their life, they naturally want to spread it to their friends and family.
Right, and Zenon actually has been practicing Falun Gong for nearly 20 years. And some of the footage that you will see later shows press conferences and speeches that were given at the Capitol just an hour ago. This takes place every year in July, on July 20th in Washington, D.C. You've actually been there yourself as a young man. Tell me about the first time you were in D.C. in 1999. Why did you go there?
Well, the first time I went to Washington, D.C. was actually in 1999, in July. It was a day or two after the Chinese government initiated a persecution of Falun Gong. Falun Gong practitioners all over North America traveled to Washington, D.C. to appeal for help from the Congress. And as you saw in the rally today, many congressmen and people came and spoke and over the years have helped us to condemn this persecution and help rescue people from China.
Great. So throughout this next hour, we will bring you live scenes from a march that will take place in Washington, D.C. The march is being queued up right now. In a few moments, you will see this march made up of, it comprises over 1,000 Falun Gong practitioners who have traveled from all over the world to be here today, like you did in 1999. And this, let's tell you about this parade route in just a little bit. They go from the west lawn of Capitol Hill, where they just were listening to these congressmen's speeches, and they will travel down Pennsylvania Avenue and will finish at the Washington Monument. And each year the parade route varies. Sometimes they go down Independence Avenue, sometimes they go down Pennsylvania Avenue. And now these, it's basically a march for freedom, and the Falun Gong, these marches, and also there are parades in celebration, but this march is to commemorate July 20th. They take place all over the world, and of course, the last one that you joined us with was the May 13th Falun Gong parade here in New York. And we're gonna tell you about the parade and the different sections, but let's go back. Let's talk about those 7 years when Falun Gong was introduced to China in 1992. And then there was this explosion. Tell me about this explosion.
Well, over the first 2 years after it was introduced to the public, Mr. Li Hongzhi, the founder, traveled all over China giving 9- and 10-day lectures to people in different places who wanted to learn the practice. And he gave over 50 of them in 2 years. So you can imagine how nonstop he traveled throughout China. After that, he published his teachings in a book, which was the contents of those lectures. And at that point, there was only about 20,000 people or so who had seen the lectures in person. And that was in 1994. So from 94 to 98, it had gone from 70 to 100 million people.
That is incredible, Zenon.
Also getting awards. I mean, Falun Gong was awarded by government sports commission bodies, by veterans associations, where Mr. Li Hongzhi went in and actually helped with the healing of people who had been injured from policing the state or fighting in wars in the past.
I believe also like China Qigong research societies.
Correct.
Where actually, you know, the efficacy of Falun Gong in public that time was incredible. And I'd like to ask you, for our viewers who might not be as familiar with Qigong, because Zenon, you are or have been a personal trainer who have knowledge of both Eastern and Western schools of thought on the human body.
Correct.
Tell me about what's the main difference between the Eastern school of thought, where it encompasses Qigong and Chinese medicine, versus the Western school of thought that is, say, aerobics or working out?
Well, essentially, Western sciences focus on the central nervous system, the muscles, the blood, the circulation system working on the body, whereas Chinese practices work the qi energy. And so when you have blockages or blood stagnation or problem with blood flow in the body, what the precursor to that is a blockage of energy flow. And so when you're getting acupuncture and whatnot, they're freeing up energy flow in your body. And just to give you an idea of what kind of practice Falun Gong is, many Tai Chi practices or acupuncture are trying to unblock one of the energy passageways in the body. But the very first exercise in Falun Gong unblocks all energy passageways in the body simultaneously. My own healing efficacy that I experienced, which I found quite profound, was right after I started practicing, I started coughing up a lot of phlegm. I'd been smoking a pack a day for a couple of years before I started practicing, and in about 3 months, for 3 months, I was just coughing every morning, black tar, and then it all stopped.
Incredible.
My lungs completely cleaned out.
Incredible. So it sounds like, well, and to my knowledge, Falun Gong was virtually free. I mean, the text, the book, you can buy it, but you can also just read it for free online.
Yeah, everything can be downloaded for free online.
Right.
Correct.
So naturally in China, you can imagine, first of all, people have been practicing Qigong for a very long time. They have a deep understanding of the human body and energy channels. And along comes Falun Gong or Falun Dafa. And what I'm trying to paint the picture to people is that this wasn't an ordinary Qigong. And I think one of the things that, if not the main thing, is because it had a set of spiritual principles attached to it. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, sure. Falun Gong's teaching is centered around what is taught as the Great Law, which is truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. And it comes out of the traditional Chinese culture, where Taoism talked about truth and Buddhism talked about compassion and Confucianism talked about propriety and tolerance. And it actually comes from the whole ideology and the culture that the Chinese Communist Party was trying to eliminate for so many years.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because throughout the program today we will be touching upon all those aspects, the fact that why is it that the Chinese Communist Party would want and does persecute a practice or members of a practice for simply believing in traditional Chinese values such as Buddhism, Taoism, beliefs, as you just mentioned. So we will talk about all of that before and as we're waiting for the march to make its way down Pennsylvania Avenue. Let's show you a short video about Falun Gong.
Falun Dafa, also known as Falun Gong, is an advanced self-cultivation practice that improves mental and physical wellness through physical exercises and the development of one's character. In China, cultivation practices have a history of thousands of years and form the spiritual foundation of Chinese civilization. In 1992, Falun Dafa was introduced to the public by Master Li Hongzhi. The practice quickly spread because of its profound principles and proven health benefits. By 1999, with over 100 million practitioners, Falun Dafa had grown to become the largest practice of its kind in China and around the world.
I feel an energy in my body that's very subtle and hard to describe, but it feels very good. I could have very little sleep and I'll feel awakened, but not like a coffee energetic, like a very calm and collected energy. And that 1 hour can feel like a day, and then I'm refreshed and ready to go.
So before I practiced Falun Gong, when I got scolded by my boss or supervisor, I was very annoyed, and immediately I would complain about others, or felt it wasn't fair. But after I started practicing, the biggest lesson I learned was looking inside and always find something to improve within myself.
At the core of Falun Dafa are the values of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Falun Dafa teaches that these are the supreme qualities of the universe and takes them to be a guide for daily life and practice.
Truthfulness, compassion, tolerance, helping one look inside. It sounds like it's a lot more than just physical exercise. Why now would the Chinese government persecute people who are trying to be better people, as we saw with that video?
Well, Falun Gong's spread was very rapid. It started to outnumber the Chinese Communist Party itself. And Falun Gong's teachings, like I said before, are coming from a traditional culture, but what's really important to note about that traditional culture is that it's not atheist, and communism is atheist. It also requires everybody in the country to think the same way. These are really bizarre concepts for us to understand, and I didn't really understand it. I understood it conceptually, but when I actually had to be in China and face the Chinese police and see exactly how this culture operates, how it affects an individual, it's really shocking. And this group thinking and this group mentality gets shaken to its core with this very simple principle of, hey, look inside yourself. Right. What ends up happening when you look inside yourself is you have to think for yourself, and you're not being atheist. So this really, on top of the numbers, the huge volume outnumbering the Communist Party member, and then teaching people to think in a way that's not communist, is a way that is a reason why totalitarian people fear good people.
Yeah, in a word, fear, right? The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, was fearful that so many people were thinking for themselves, that like you mentioned before, before 1999, they actually gave a lot of awards to the founder, Master Li Hongzhi of Falun Gong, and a lot of support behind it. But they saw that all these, like you said, 70 to 100 million people, these are numbers that have been documented. These are estimates that the CCP made, and they...
It's not even that the Chinese government itself wanted to persecute Falun Gong. It's the nature of the communist totalitarian regime that the person at the head has absolute authority and decision-making power over them. It was already reported, even in Western media, that the Standing Committee of the Politburo, which is essentially the cabinet for the chairman, the highest officials in the country, all disagreed with his decision to start the campaign against Falun Gong. But the chairman at the time, Jiang Zemin, who we want to bring to justice, who is no longer the chairman of China, it was his expressed will to wage this irrational, fear-based campaign of murder and persecution.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll see more of that, examples of that in the march today. If you're just joining us, this is NTD TV's live coverage of the Falun Gong Rally for Freedom live in Washington, D.C. This is the second hour where we will take you live to a parade that is queuing up right now. We're waiting for it to make its way towards our camera so you can watch it. They're traveling down Pennsylvania Avenue from the west lawn of Capitol Hill to the end where is the Washington Monument is the destination. And in the last hour, we saw congressmen and women and also human rights activists and many rights organizations talk about this persecution that has been going on since 1999.
Correct. And what I found is, because when this started in 1999, I came from Toronto at the time and went to the very first rally, and I've gone to them throughout the years, except for this year I'm here with you in the studio.
That's right.
But I've gone many years, so I do know the feeling of the heat coming off the blacktop on the road. I have stand there to watch the righteous indignation of our elected officials here in the U.S. Speaking out for virtue against the communist regime. But this year, there was a lot of emphasis, particularly from the Vice President of Freedom House, when he was talking about the changes on the ground in mainland China that Falun Gong practitioners are creating. And this peaceful resistance, this non-violent resistance, is not only about turning the other cheek, but it's about educating. It's about a grassroots movement to win the hearts and the minds of the Chinese people back, so that they're not doing bad things to their own people, so that they're, the goodness that we cultivate inside ourselves, we want to bring it to other people. And it's actually happening in China, and it's being documented by third-party investigators that on the ground the country is changing from the bottom up because of these efforts of following truth, compassion, forbearance. And for me, I couldn't be more proud.
Absolutely, and you will see examples of all of that in the 3 different sections of the march that is coming up, and when we bring that to you, we will describe and comment on each section. We've seen it many times, and what you're talking about, the persecution and also the calling for an end to it that we just saw, that will be in the middle section, which is the exposing and calling for an end to the persecution of Falun Gong in China. And I do believe that in 2017 today, what you're seeing today, what we heard today, is a culmination of 17 to 18 very difficult years where people have been talking about this and trying to raise awareness. And finally, you're seeing reports being provided by not just Freedom House, Amnesty International, but you're seeing last year a resolution signed by Congress, passed unanimously, that openly condemns the persecution of Falun Gong by the Chinese Communist Party, as well as the forced organ harvesting issue, which is also have now been brought to light, but it's getting more traction now. And this, I couldn't have imagined this even 5 years ago, when people started hearing about this and they could not believe what was going on in mainland China. And so now we actually would like to take you to, you can see that the march is queuing up. They are standing there, and you see practitioners of Falun Dafa. This is the first section. They're holding a banner called Falun Dafa, or Falun Dafa is good. And they are on Pennsylvania Avenue. You can see the police cars, almost like the pace car, setting the pace. And when this starts, we will talk all about what you see. And the image is small right now, but I do see that there are members that are playing instruments. And this is very interesting. Do you know what that is, Zenon?
That is the Tianguo Marching Band.
And for those non-Chinese linguists out there, do you know what Tianguo means?
Tian Guo means like a heavenly Guo. Guo is a band?
Guo actually, I'm sorry I put you on the spot there, but Tian Guo actually...
No, I should know.
Tian Guo means celestial or heavenly.
Right, yeah.
And, of course, marching band, right? And this is the most interesting band in the world. They don't just travel to Falun Gong marches and Falun Gong parades each year, but they actually go to various marches and parades around the globe. Actually, last month, they were in your home country, Canada, in Calgary, and they performed at the Calgary Stampede, which I think it's the largest stampede. Those of you that are not...
in North America. Yeah, people ride all the way from Texas to Calgary.
That's incredible. And so the Tianguo Yuetuan, or Tianguo Celestial Marching Band, is there. So you guys can see that they're queuing up, and following them will be practitioners of Falun Gong holding up banners. We will tell you what those say and what those mean, and the entire 3 sections of the parade. And that's starting right now. So before we get to hear them and talk about them more, let's perhaps play a short video. I just want to cue up a video about what the organ harvesting is, because that's something that we're going to be talking about for quite often, and that's what the members of Congress alluded to. So if we have that video ready, we can play it right now.
We call it a new form of evil on the world. It's never been done by any government in the past, to take a large group of its own people and say, we're going to kill you without any kind of a trial, and we're going to sell your vital organ parts.
Starting at the end of 1999, the number of transplants taking place just exploded.
China carries out more organ transplant surgeries than any country besides the United States. But unlike other countries, China has no effective organ donation program. Zhao Shuhuan was put in a Chinese labor camp because she practices Falun Gong.
我每到一个劳教所，他都会让我们检查身体，给我们抽血验血。每个劳教所都是。
I'm absolutely convinced that over a long period from 1999 onwards, organ harvesting from prisoners has been taking place, especially with Falun Gong.
The military's making money off of it, the hospitals are making money off of it, the middlemen are making money off of it. And we talk about money, we're talking about a multi-million-dollar operation.
Millions of Falun Gong practitioners are being persecuted in China for their beliefs. In 1999, Communist Party leader Jiang Zemin issued orders to break them financially, ruin their reputations, and destroy them physically. Since then, thousands of Falun Gong practitioners have disappeared without a trace.
Military hospitals get watched in China, okay? There is nothing they can do without the party central taking note of what they're doing. Was this run by triads? No. This is run by the state. This was murder, and it came from the state.
In 2006, 2 Canadians started to investigate allegations of forced organ harvesting in China. They found at least 52 points of circumstantial evidence, including websites of Chinese hospitals offering matching organs in less than a week.
It's just not possible unless you have an unlimited source of organs. And these are people who are alive. We're talking about live donors. The actual transplant surgery itself was the form of execution. These were living people that were killed for their organs.
And you are now watching the beginning of the march down Pennsylvania Avenue by Falun Gong practitioners. What you're seeing here are members of the Tianguo Marching Band, which also means Heavenly Kingdom Marching Band, or as you pointed out, it could also
directly
mean
translated as Divine Land.
Divine Land Marching Band.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting marching band. As we were saying before that video, they travel around the world, not just to Falun Gong parades and marches, but to other events as well. And what's unique about them is that they're a marching band. So they play, you know, like American or Canadian songs like Stars and Stripes Forever, and let's take a listen right now.
They also have original scores created by the community. Rally for freedom, you know, particularly it happening in Washington, D.C., it gives you this very American spirit to this very Chinese cause, and to see them playing these Western instruments and this marching band, which is a very, very Western type thing, not Chinese. It's very interesting, and I've always been fascinated by the effort of the Tianguo marching band to embody this very Western thing, to express the inner spirit and call for freedom. I think it's beautiful.
Absolutely. Like you mentioned, they're a marching band in the Western sense, where there's percussion, piccolo, flute, you know, instruments like the clarinet, saxophone, a drum line. You know, these are things, a bass that we're used to in America, seeing before in parades and in football games. You know, this is such a part of American culture, but to see Chinese people, and they're not all Chinese, but you know, there are people from all over the world who join this band, as long as
it's a Chinese community for sure.
That's right, and it's really a sight to see, and people love them, and we hear stories about praises. You know, people have never seen a band like that before, and it really touches their hearts.
And this is what I think we've always been trying to do, from our peaceful candle vigils to any of our rallies, is we really want to touch people's hearts in a way that Falun Gong has touched our hearts and uplifted our hearts. We do want people to help us stop the persecution, but not only for ourselves, but standing up against evil lightens and strengthens the hearts of everyone.
That's right, Zenon. And so now you're seeing the second section. You saw some signs that said Falun Dafa is good, and now what you're seeing is a flag that says "Stop Persecution of Falun Gong in China," and this is really the reason why we've all gathered here today.
It's the heart. You get into the heart of the issue with that giant banner, and Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Layton, you know, at the beginning of her speech, took time to read out all the different banners that people may have not been seeing.
That's right. She pointed out some of her favorites, and that, I think, was her favorite, in addition to a banner like this that says "Falun Dafa is great." Or here you see truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, which are the three core principles of Falun Dafa. And it's just unimaginable why a government would, or the former Chinese regime would persecute people in such a way who practice these three principles.
Well, it's the former regime which initiated the persecution, but the current regime is still continuing it. And the apparatuses that were put in place to persecute Falun Gong, having not been stopped, are being used now against other groups in China, and so it's very, very corrosive for not just China but the international community, as China becomes more and more part of the world, or tries to. We have to be standing up against these evils, because they're coming to our back door. They're already in our movie theaters.
That's right. Yes, you're referring to AMC and Legendary Pictures that was purchased by Wanda Group. Actually, anyways, you can now see more members of Falun Dafa Group holding banners. Falun Dafa Hao means Falun Dafa is good. Earlier you saw the three principles: Zhen, Shan, Ren, truthfulness, compassion, forbearance. They're wearing the trademark yellow t-shirt and white or khaki bottoms. And this parade has three sections. This is the first section we saw earlier. It begun with the celestial or heavenly marching band, Divine Land Marching Band, and now you're seeing different banners that say "Stop the Persecution of Falun Gong." One thing you mentioned, Zenon, it's not just Falun Gong, of course, and if it makes Falun Gong is the major group that the Chinese government, the former regime, persecutes. The vice president of Freedom House, Robert Herman, pointed out that they published a massive study this February detailing the many ways that practitioners of Falun Gong, as well as other victims of religious persecution in China, are persecuted. For example, there's widespread surveillance on them, and there's
There's widespread surveillance now, I think, probably all over the world, and people will be very quick to comment about that. But the level of surveillance that takes place in China and the consequences of that surveillance are the reasons people are afraid of it. This is what is actually happening right now. It's not an ideological fear, oh, this is what could happen by all that surveillance. It's actually been taking place. And the internet and the surveillance technology that was designed and developed in China, it was developed while this persecution campaign was going on. So they were just further weaponizing themselves. Whereas when the internet was initiated in North America, it was something about freedom and information. So
yeah,
the development and use of technology it's absolutely night and day. And all the things that people are afraid of when it comes to that level of surveillance are what the Chinese people live every single day.
Absolutely. And you see here the solemn image of practitioners of Falun Gong gathering at Washington, D.C. We are actually live right now in Washington, D.C. on Pennsylvania Avenue. You're seeing practitioners of Falun Dafa holding various flags and signs and banners. This one says Falun Dafa How, which means Falun Dafa is good. Then this says 真善人, or truthfulness, compassion, tolerance, the three principles, the three core principles of Falun Dafa, and various banners that are in Chinese as well. This is the second section that's passing by. They're walking a distance of 2.1 kilometers, or about 1.3 miles if you're in America. I know that the rest of the world uses kilometers. So here's what we see now. We can take a look.
It's a very solemn experience to take place in a march for this. I have done it many years, and you know, feeling the heat off the road and the sun beating down on you, and all these kinds of things where you start to feel your first world discomforts. And I remember it really made me pause and ponder about everything that I have, that the discomfort I'm feeling to express a freedom is so small compared to the danger and trepidation and mortal danger that people are living under right now in communist China.
Yeah, and it's sometimes easy to get lost in seeing the persecution as an 18-year, this massive crime against humanity. And what I like to point out is the personal stories that each one of these thousands and millions of people who have been affected. Each one has a story.
A gripping, amazing stories. There's so many people escaping from China in harrowing ways, on their feet through the mountains, through the various dangerous militarized places in East Asia, where they're just doing everything they can to get out of China, to escape to a place where they can live a normal life.
And you see here children, and children have been victimized in this persecution. Many of them lost a parent or both parents out of the blue. There's been tragic stories of children who come home from school in China only to find their house broken into, their parents taken away, and that child is now an orphan. We actually had a chance to document just one of the many thousands of stories. This is about a little girl who, the first time she met her father, he was in prison. And so let's take a quick look at one of these stories who are victims of this persecution.
我第一次见到爸爸是在监狱里，看到爸爸就像看到陌生人一样，然后爸爸知道我是他的女儿，就想抱抱我。可能在潜意识里也知道他是我爸爸，但是我看他实在是太瘦了，所以就没让他抱过我。 然后妈妈去很多地方上访吧，然后因为我爸爸的死因，然后就去讨个说法。
我丈夫就因为在中国坚持对法轮功的信仰，他不放弃这个真善忍这种理念，所以说被中共迫害死。 我姐姐非常担心我的安全，他们怕我也被抓起来，让我放弃，就是说去上访、去控告什么的。孩子虽然那时候他就是很小，可能不理解我做什么，但是我想他有一天他会长大，他会明白我所做的一切。
And now you're seeing the commemoration of just a small portion of the many of thousands who've been persecuted to death. You see practitioners of Falun Gong wearing all white and each holding a picture of someone who has died. And like the video that we just saw, the person who has perished is usually a mother, a father, a sister or brother, or a son or daughter. And in the case of the video that we just watched, it was a daughter who lost her father to the persecution. And words cannot describe the level of sadness, of course, and this is this is a small portion of the people who have died in this persecution.
Correct. We commemorate the names that we are able to confirm, but we know through documentation that this persecution is nationwide.
Absolutely.
And to give you an idea of how hard it is for us to confirm these names, for people even just to give us information so that we can confirm a death, those people themselves have to risk their life.
And it's actually mandated in China. If somebody dies at the hands of torture, in this case, then what we've learned is that their bodies are almost immediately cremated, so that
right.
you cannot tell who they were.
In the beginning of the persecution, I know that it was common knowledge that if somebody was tortured to death, that it would be counted as a suicide.
Absolutely. And actually, there's an organization within the government that controls everything from the top down, the persecution, from how they keep an eye on people, to how they get arrested, to the torture, and to the cover-up of the murders, as well as the illegal harvesting of their organs.
Yeah, just over a month before the persecution started in China, they started an extrajudicial branch within the government that permeated all the way down to the municipal level, from the national level, and at all levels in between, an office to manage and execute this persecution campaign throughout the entire nation, and it was called the 610 office.
That's right, and we have a short video about that 610 office. Here it is.
On June 10, 1999, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party created a group for handling the Falun Gong problem. That group created what came to be known as the 610 office, named for the date of its establishment. Since then, the 610 office has overseen China's nationwide persecution of Falun Gong. The 610 office exists above Chinese law, despite having no legal mandate. It's been given enormous financial resources. Reuters has compared the 610 office to the Nazi Gestapo or secret police. The 610 office has deep ties to the Chinese police, labor camps, state-run media, the court systems, schools, and universities, and even Chinese embassies around the world, directing them to carry out the Communist Party's persecution of Falun Gong. For nearly 18 years, the 610 office has been responsible for the mass surveillance, arrest, detention, and torture of millions of Falun Gong practitioners in China. The United States Congress and other members of the international community have repeatedly demanded the Chinese government to put an end to the 610 office.
Thank you. Now, if you're just joining us, you're watching scenes from Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania Avenue, where more than 1,000 practitioners of Falun Dafa gather and march towards the Washington Monument. They started this afternoon at the west lawn of Capitol Hill, and in our first hour of coverage, we brought to you speeches by very well-known congressmen and congresswomen, as well as advocates of civil rights and human rights. I'd like to now read a proclamation and a letter of support by another well-known senator, Marco Rubio. And there are a lot of senators and congressman that couldn't be there, and this is Marco's words. Dear friends, to those who have gathered at the U.S. Capitol to draw attention to the Chinese Communist Party's campaign against the Falun Gong, thank you. As you well know, the Chinese government and Communist Party officials continue to systematically and even violently pressure Falun Gong practitioners to renounce their beliefs and stop practicing their faith. Not only does the Chinese government brutally target Falun Gong practitioners, it also continues to harass, detain, and sentence family members, lawyers, and others who have contact with Falun Gong adherents. As the world mourns the loss of the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Liu Xiaobo, we are reminded again of the Chinese government's brutality and callous disregard for human life. Marco Rubio's letter, I won't read all of it, but he says many powerful and poignant words in support to end the persecution of Falun Gong in China. And he's also joined by other senators who send their letters as well, who couldn't be there today. And this one is from Tammy Baldwin, who is a senator of Wisconsin. And Tammy writes, Dear friends, thank you for the invitation to join you today as you mark the 18th year anniversary of the Chinese government campaign to persecute and suppress Falun Gong practitioners in China. I regret that I could not attend. Today, I add my voice to support the Wisconsin Falun Dafa Association in calling for an end to the persecution of Falun Gong in China. I also celebrate the Chinese citizens who are taking a principled and peaceful stand by rejecting the violence and inequality of the Chinese government. And those are letters and proclamations of support by two senators from the United States. And actually right now, if we take you live to the march that's going on, you can see practitioners of Falun Gong and Falun Dafa holding signs to call for an end to this brutal persecution that's been going on for the past 18 years. And we just read some statements by senators and congressmen, and they spoke about non-violent protests. And no group has had the praise that Falun Gong has had for the last 18 years. Not only have they done this protesting, but all of it has been non-violent, as you see today with this parade and rally.
That's right. And to be standing under the boot of the world's last communist superpower has not been easy. I remember the first rally in 1999 when we all rushed to Washington, D.C. We all had no idea what was happening or what to do. And over these years, we have worked very hard to stay in line and true to the principles of Falun Gong and to remain compassionate, to remain nonviolent. And what is very heartening is to see that independent investigation is starting to document the effects on the ground in China and how China is changing from the bottom up, from actions that are nonviolent, that are caring for the human spirit and for the people inside China.
That's right, and you've had congresswomen and men who have been in Congress for more than 20, 30 years who have been staunch proponents of this cause, like Congresswoman Ileana Russ-Layton of Florida, who I think she said it best, enough is enough today, she said earlier. And she points out many of the reports and initiatives that you mentioned, including one recently by Freedom House. There's other organizations like Falun Gong Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, the video you watched earlier, that these massive reports detailing. There was another gentleman today, David Cleveland, a senior lawyer of the Catholic Charities of Washington. He basically told people how difficult it is to get an organ in America versus how easy it is in China. And there's a huge discrepancy there.
Yes, there's a lot of money to be made, and this is run, you know, with military hospitals. This comes from the state. This is not a small problem. It is a state-sanctioned, nationwide crime that is essentially using humans as cattle and generating millions upon millions of dollars from persecuting people for their spiritual beliefs.
And she also said, describing what you just said, she described the persecution as shameful and tragic. And I couldn't think of better words to describe that. Now you're seeing flags and banners being held up by practitioners of Falun Dafa that read Falun Dafa is good. And also you see there are Falun Dafa around the world You will see more of that. This march is comprised of several sections. The first section is Falun Dafa good banners, Falun Dafa around the world. It's showing you that there was a period of time in China for a short time, 7 years, when Falun Gong was the most popular Qigong practice. We were talking about this in the beginning of our broadcast. It's unimaginable to think that it goes from being praised, being hailed as the most popular practice, to being persecuted vigilantly.
It is unimaginable, and I even find that the question of why are they persecuting Falun Gong, there has to be a reason. Itself it's a misnomer, because how do you make sense of, or how do you rationalize an elimination campaign? It is by its very nature irrational. There is not a rational reason for it. We can look to the size of Falun Gong, we can look to its traditional beliefs, but that still doesn't give any good reason for what is happening right now. It's born from a very sick and twisted mentality. That is the only way to make sense of the past 20 years of crimes that we've been witnessing specifically against Falun Gong at a national level throughout all of China.
And you see that being reflected here with the men, women, and children who are holding signs that are calling for an end to this persecution. You see this child on the side. She was veering off the march path, and now she's gone into back into the path, but she was holding a sign that says "Stop the persecution of Falun Gong." It really breaks your heart to see that children, they've lost parents. There are actually organizations that just help Falun Gong orphans in China find a new home, because they would come home and their parents are suddenly taken away. They'd come home to no mom, no dad. And it's incredibly tragic. And that's what you're seeing right now here, this large banner that says, end the persecution. 100 million people are being affected. This one says, bring Jiang to justice.
Which is really important. And I think that bringing Jiang Zemin to justice is an opportunity for the international community. We are talking about this escalation of this 18-year campaign of persecution, and the advancement of their technology to wage that persecution further and further and more effectively. And what we also have to remember is that that happened while China was being kind of embraced and welcomed into the international community. And there is responsibility on the international community to help hold China accountable. And having welcomed them into the international community and helped to finance this advancement of technology had made it harder for the Chinese people, had made their lives more dangerous. And there's some responsibility that we on the international community bear. And being able to help bring the perpetrator of this campaign to justice would go a long way into helping to heal the wounds of the Chinese people. Because as this persecution campaign ends and the Chinese people are allowed to think, are allowed to open their minds, are allowed to learn these things, they're not only going to be measuring the actions of their own authorities, but they're going to be measuring the actions of the whole world, of all the people who want to engage them and help bring civilization forward. Everybody's going to be accountable to the part they've played in this very, very large crime against humanity, because we either spoke out against it, we either ignored it, or we helped the Chinese Communist Party. And for those people who helped, I'm very frightened for you, and I really hope that you can get on the right side of this and really help the Chinese people, help the entire nation, and in so help the whole world, because it is a really important country in the world.
And different countries are doing their part as well. And some countries, like Spain, there have been initiatives to, like the signs we saw, bring Jiang Zemin, the former leader of the Chinese Communist Party, to justice.
Correct.
Now, you wouldn't think that it's possible in China, but there is an initiative started in China that it's called Lawsuits Against Jiang. And it takes a bit of explaining, but luckily we have Matt Gnezda, who is an executive producer here at this network, NTD TV. He produces a very very popular show called China Uncensored. It's a satirical analyzation of the news that comes out of China. And now we'd like to show you a video where Matt explains what this initiative is, the Sujiang Initiative.
Thanks, Dan. Hundreds of thousands of people across China are doing something very unusual. They're filing legal complaints against a former Chinese leader, Jiang Zemin. Originally, Jiang Zemin rose to power by supporting the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. But that's not what these legal complaints are about. They're about Jiang Zemin's persecution of Falun Gong, the Chinese meditation practice. Someone who was tortured or persecuted in China fills out a form and writes up the details of their complaint. Typically, a complaint will describe in detail how the claimant has been harassed, tortured, and so on. Now, sometimes it's an individual complaint, and sometimes it's more of a general complaint signed by a group. These documents are then filed with China's highest legal authority, which is the Supreme People's Procuratorate. The Procuratorate is kind of like the Department of Justice, so in theory it should be investigating these complaints. There have been more than 200,000 complaints filed since 2015, according to a Falun Gong website. Filing a complaint against Jiang Zemin is perfectly legal. In fact, it's the official method, but it can also be dangerous. There have been hundreds of cases where the Communist Party will persecute someone for filing a complaint about being persecuted in the first place. But as I said, more than 200,000 people inside China have filed these kind of complaints anyway. Now, what does the Procuratorate do with these complaints? Currently not much. Jiang Zemin hasn't been indicted and he's not facing any charges right now. But it's possible that in the future, the current leader of China will try to indict Jiang Zemin for a variety of crimes, including the persecution he launched against Falun Gong. So, in that case, when Jiang goes to trial, these complaints could be brought out as evidence against him, leading to a conviction. But for now, the legal complaints against Jiang Zemin keep piling up. Back to you, Dan.
Thank you, Matt. Very well job done explaining that. And like he said, 200,000 people have risked their lives to bring Jiang to justice in China.
That's right. And this initiative actually dates back into the early 2000s when different international laws were used to file complaints against Jiang Zemin in foreign courts, and I know in Argentina and some other countries where it actually got into the legal system and started to move forward. So this campaign has actually been happening around China, but as Matt illustrated in 2015, the campaign really started to become a grassroots movement in mainland China. And this speaks to the analysis from the vice president of the NGO Freedom House, where he was speaking at the rally earlier today and talking about how the grassroots efforts in China is actually changing China from the bottom up. And we see even support from the United States government. Another congressman highlighted that they're enacting laws that you do not only have to sue a country if you want to try and litigate a problem that's happening in that country, but you can actually file cases against individuals who've commit those crimes. So it's creating a better legal environment for more of these cases to continually be filed and apply more and more pressure on the perpetrator of this persecution campaign, Jiang Zemin, who is the former chairman in China right now.
And it's incredible because in China, the culture is to fear the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, it's documented that the Communist Party, they would say things like they need to show the public, this is translated from, they need to show the public they need to do mass cleansings every 10 or so years, and you've seen that with the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, and then also
Cultural Revolution is one campaign, but there were many campaigns,
right.
And they would even encourage people to publish papers, and professors publish papers. Tell us what you think. How can we move the country forward? And they would allow people to expose their ideologies, and any people with ideologies they didn't like, they would go get rid of them. So there's these types of campaigns periodically throughout the beginning of the Chinese Communist Party, and it's built just a fear right into the hardwiring in the Chinese psyche, where you know that anytime you cross the Communist Party, it could be your end.
And so hearing Matt describe more than 200,000 people, this is just something
it's unheard of.
It's unheard of, right?
It's unheard of.
And counting, these complaints, official complaints, are still going on and continue to. And I think as more people see that, they don't have to be afraid to voice what they think is right and wrong. Like in the past, you might be condemned or killed for it.
So we're saying 200,000 people, right? Doing that, right? So that would be like, 1,000 or 2,000 people in Germany filing individual legal complaints against Hitler.
Absolutely.
I mean, that would be, it's absurd to even think of that because of the amount of danger they would be in. But this is what is happening on the ground today in mainland China.
Especially because the persecution of Falun Gong is still happening today. Practitioners are still being arrested, captured, monitored, tortured. to renounce their beliefs. That is why all these people are here today. And actually, today commemorates July 20th, 1999, because that is when the persecution of Falun Gong began. But actually, the efforts to expose the persecution and speak out against it, that happens every single day.
Yes.
You know, practitioners like you know, you have a family, a job, but you spend your time on the side, what time you have to get your congressman to notice, for example, and it's paid off, actually. You know, every year these congresspeople are at Capitol Hill speaking out specifically in support of Falun Dafa.
And that support is heard by the mainland people inside China and gives them more strength and more courage to do the things that they're doing, being rescuing human rights lawyers, rescuing Falun Gong practitioners from incarceration, or helping in these actual legal cases that are being put forward in the legal system, where the chairman himself may not have been indicted. You can be sure that the entire administrative body of the People's Republic of China knows that these filings are happening.
Absolutely.
This is not going unnoticed. So there is a wave of a righteous wave of indignation, of support for freedom, and in our hearts supporting the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, to help the world know that Falun Dafa is good and is not something that should be persecuted.
And that's really one thing I want to emphasize with today, is not just what's been going on, but the 18 years, the personal efforts that these individuals have made. And actually, I'd like to play a short video that describes an event that took place in early 2000 when a group of Westerners traveled to China to protest. Here's the video.
On November 20th, 2001, 36 Falun Gong practitioners from 12 countries gathered in Tiananmen Square in Beijing, China. They were all Westerners. They held up a large banner with the words, "Truth, Compassion, Tolerance." They were immediately surrounded by police vans. The police beat them, threw them in the vans, and detained them under orders from the Chinese Communist Party. Their crime? Peacefully calling for an end to the persecution of millions of Falun Dafa practitioners in China who have been arrested, tortured, and killed by the CCP. The event attracted the attention of major media outlets around the world. That led to the intervention by the British, French, American, Canadian, Australian consulates in China. The Chinese police had no choice but to release and deport these Falun Gong practitioners back to their home countries.
Zenon, I can't imagine what was going through your mind. Tell us, actually, how old were you and what was going through your mind when you went there?
So that was 2001. That would have made me, I believe, 23. So I was about 23 years old when I traveled with a friend to mainland China. And we ended up joining 36 other people from about 10 countries, or 34, including us. And we held a banner. We wanted people inside mainland China to know that they were being lied to. Back in 2001, Chinese people were told that other governments around the world also banned Falun Gong. And by us showing up there with our flags from our other countries, stirred the pot a little and let the people in mainland China know that they have to reevaluate this. Is this really what the Chinese government is saying? Because believe it or not, they know that there's propaganda, that they know the state controls it, but because of the years of indoctrination, they do get deceived by it. It's a very bizarre thing.
Right, and you know, in the beginning of the persecution, the Chinese Communist Party, they thought that they would eradicate Falun Gong very quickly, actually, because they've succeeded in doing everything else.
And all their campaigns, they're able to just identify a group and wipe them out in a very short period of time. And I believe they were estimating 3 months for stopping the 100 million people in China from practicing Falun Gong, and it's been 18 years. And not only have they not stopped, the grassroots effort is now changing the tide in the last communist superpower in the world. We are witnessing history. I'm honored to be a part of it, and I think it's something very special.
Yeah, and no other than today is it really evident that the tide is changing. You know, we just read something just in the last week where the United States Chinese ambassador, U.S. ambassador to China, Terry Branstad, called on China on Thursday, this past Thursday, to release all prisoners of conscience following the death of a Nobel Peace Prize winning dissident Liu Xiaobo.
Right, now that may sound like something like a politician is just speaking and sounding off. In all the past 18 years, we haven't seen a dignitary standing inside China saying, release all prisoners of conscience. We haven't seen that, and this is a result of the sacrifice of many, many people over a very long time of continually standing up against the Chinese Communist Party to show these world leaders that this is the right thing to do.
Wow. Incredible. And actually, real quickly, I'd like to pull up a photo of you, Zenon, in Tiananmen Square. Here it is. And this is you with the 36 other Westerners.
Actually standing behind the character that says truth. And I felt pretty honored to be helping to hold that character up.
I mean, you are in the mouth of the tiger at this point. You know, it's just 2 years after the massive persecution began in 1999. It's really courageous what you guys did, and like you said, these grassroots efforts have really shook the international world, and it's being led by members of Congress here, and we actually have a collection of more letters of support from nearly a dozen congressmen, in addition to the people that were there at Capitol Hill today. So you really see the tide is changing.
And that's also in addition to the unanimous bipartisan resolution that was passed recently.
Last year. Yeah, House Resolution 343 that condemns the persecution of Falun Gong. So let's just show you quickly some of the congressmen and women who've sent their support in today. This is Bob Foster, congressman.
Bill Foster.
Bill Foster, I'm sorry. Thank you. Blaine Lukemeyer. Keith Ellison. Mark Pokin. Michael Capuano from my home state, Massachusetts. I'm very familiar with him. Patrick Meehan. And as you can see, the voices are very strong right now, and I do feel like things are changing a lot very quickly in the last few years. More and more now you're seeing reports on major mainstream media, in addition to ours, about organ harvesting, about prisoners of conscience, about the human rights violations of China, where...
I think most notably is in 2015, the way people inside China felt enough indignation that they were willing to risk their life to go and file a complaint against a chairman, a former chairman, the former absolute supreme leader of their country, not with anybody behind them, but just with their own fingerprint. And that shows, that speaks to, I guess, the despair that they feel, which is, that's one thing, that they may either they feel like they don't have enough to lose, or they just feel like this so strongly that in their own heart, in their own mind, in their own spirit, that there needs to be indignation, there needs to be a stand against it, that they're willing to risk their own lives to do it is shocking for hundreds of thousands of people in mainland China. If you had told me this was going to happen, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have been very surprised.
And I think largely because there's been a book that's been published called The 9 Commentaries that really has been changing, especially Chinese people's minds about the Communist Party. We have a short video about what that book is. Take a look.
The 9 Commentaries on the Communist Party is a series of editorials published in November 2004 by the Epoch Times newspaper, first in Chinese, then in English. Today, the series has spread worldwide as a book. It's available in at least 33 languages, and it's inspired a set of TV documentaries as well. The 9 Commentaries is openly critical of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, and its use of brutality to rule over the Chinese people. It reveals the CCP's true history, a history that Chinese textbooks and government propaganda have buried for decades. the systematic use of torture and brainwashing, the billions of dollars spent on labor camps, and the cover-up of mass murder. Within a few weeks of publication in Chinese, the Epoch Times began getting statements from Chinese citizens saying they wanted to withdraw from the CCP. As more statements came in, the Epoch Times started publishing them. This led to what's now called the Tuidang movement, or the withdrawing from the party movement. Today, more than 270 million Chinese people have withdrawn or renounced their affiliation with the CCP. The Falun Gong rally for freedom in Washington, D.C.
And if you're just joining us, you're watching NTD TV's live broadcast of the Falun Gong Rally for Freedom that's taking place on July 20th today. You're looking at a live march in the nation's capital. There you see Capitol Hill, the legendary building behind a group of over 1,000 practitioners of Falun Dafa who have gathered there marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, and you're seeing banners that say, "Bring Cheng to justice," that say, "End the persecution of Falun Dafa."
Freedom of belief is good.
Absolutely, and this is the tail end of the march. They've marched for over a mile from the Capitol building to the Washington Monument, and they do so every single year. This isn't the only event that takes place around this time, July 20th. In fact, across the globe, practitioners of Falun Dafa showed their support and also showed their commemoration of this date when the persecution began in China. And so if you're just joining us, you might not actually know. You see these people wearing yellow T-shirts and holding up banners, and you know that they practice Falun Gong. You know now that Falun Gong is being persecuted heavily for the last 18 years, but you might not know what Falun Gong actually is. And we talked about that in the beginning of our broadcast. Zenon, my guest, has been a practitioner of Falun Dafa or Falun Gong for the last 20 years nearly. Just a little bit, Zenon, when you read Zhuang Falun, the book that has the principles, how did you feel that first time you read it?
First time I read it, I felt actually relaxed. I felt like a big weight was lifted off my shoulders. I had, various health ailments or from a fairly wild youth, and to finally find the answers that I had been spending thousands of dollars looking for, traveling around to different teachers and whatnot, and studying all these different things, that I was able to finally find the thing that I was looking for. I finally felt very relaxed and very at peace, and diving into it and feeling the changes and transformations in my body and in my mind. It was only solidifying further and further, and rationally validating all of these sometimes deeper spiritual things that I'm learning about. It's taught in such a rational way that it gave me such a grounding that it just it made it easier for me to continue on and on, because I just kept getting stronger and stronger.
Right.
And that strength I had to tap into when the persecution started. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had the strength to stand up and face that evil.
What about on a physical level? Did you notice any changes physically with yourself?
Yeah, I said earlier in the broadcast, I think one of the quick things I can just quickly note is I used to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day before practicing Falun Gong. And when I started practicing, I just had my lungs completely purged for 3 months. I was coughing up black phlegm for 3 months. And then after that, I never coughed again, and my lungs are beautiful. And that to me is a really fast, powerful change that comes from just doing these Chinese exercises. It's not something that's easily explained through Western science, but through my years of practicing, I've learned a lot about it.
Yeah, and now you see the end of the march that has been taking place the last hour. This last banner says 9 commentaries motivated 278 million people to quit the Chinese Communist Party, and the 9 commentaries was something we touched briefly upon. It was a book that really shook the modern foundation of how people thought about China and the Communist Party and all the atrocities and how it really works.
To systematically explain each campaign one after another, it's a very unsettling read, but it's a very important read, so that you don't know, but rose-colored glasses are put on your face when you're taught to understand a modern-day China. Everyone is getting rose-colored glasses put on, and to read the 9 commentaries is to take those off and to really look at this twisted, evil, murderous regime that we engage with every day.
Yeah, and for those of you that just joined in and caught the end of that parade and want to know what Falun Gong is, we have a quick video that we will play. What is Falun Gong?
Falun Dafa, also known as Falun Gong, is an advanced self-cultivation practice that improves mental and physical wellness through physical exercises and the development of one's character. In China, cultivation practices have a history of thousands of years and form the spiritual foundation of Chinese civilization. In 1992, Falun Dafa was introduced to the public by Master Li Hongzhi. The practice quickly spread because of its profound principles and proven health benefits. By 1999, with over 100 million practitioners, Falun Dafa had grown to become the largest practice of its kind in China and around the world.
I feel an energy in my body that's very subtle and hard to describe, but it feels very good. I could have very little sleep and I'll feel awakened, but not like a coffee energetic, like a very calm and collected energy. And that 1 hour it can feel like a day, and then I'm refreshed and ready to go.
So before I practiced Falun Gong, when I got scolded by my boss or supervisor, I was very annoyed, and immediately I would complain about others, or felt it wasn't fair. But after I started practicing, the biggest lesson I learned was looking inside and always find something to improve within myself.
At the core of Falun Dafa are the values of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Falun Dafa teaches that these are the supreme qualities of the universe and takes them to be a guide for daily life and practice.
Brings us to the end of our program today, the second hour. We brought you scenes live from a march live at Washington, D.C. If you're just watching, thank you so much for watching us. This is Dan Chen for NTD TV, and this is Zenon Dolnicki with me. We'll see you again.